Welcome, everybody. If you're watching live, as always, please feel free to ask any questions along the way. If you think you might like to come on the show yourself, please do get in contact. My details are on the channel's About page. Today's guest is Brent Rubell. Hello, Brent.
Hi, Eddie. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good.
Good,
I'm
good.
good.
Would you like to introduce yourself quickly? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Brent. I'm an engineer at Adafruit Industries since 2018 now.
Okay.
I work on mostly embedded software right now, and also like a lot of systems things. So like our IoT platform, and I also write guides for Adafruit as well.
Okay. Very good. I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit more in a bit. But
Oh
let's
yeah.
first start with your childhood. That's where I like to begin.
Oh no.
Can you tell us
Okay.
about about how things were for you back then? What you got up to and where your interests were, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. As far as like engineering is concerned, right? Like
Well, anything,
or
what
anything.
what
All
were
right,
you
cool.
into back then? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Like for a while I was into sports. That didn't last long. S Switched to being interested into, like, taking things apart because I feel that's, like it's not the barometer, but it's a barometer for how well people are, like, "How are you into engineering?" That's it. It's
Yeah.
usually stuff I got yelled at for taking apart, which isn't
Okay.
great, but, like, stuff I
What age were
shouldn't.
you using a screwdriver as like a measure of
Oh
whether or not
god.
you might go into this direction?
Like, grade school for sure, like,
Right.
K through 3 for sure. I
Yeah.
don't know the metric, the precise time when it happened, but it was early. Um The real question is like when I wasn't using a screwdriver for
Yeah.
what was going on, right? Like, how was I getting
Why
enough done
weren't you?
without right? Like, and then I figured out, oh, there's this tool to do this way easier than my hands. Um, so yeah, I was interested in that when I was younger. I also, when my parents moved, I guess like in third or fourth grade to more like less suburban area, I guess it was more walkable and bikeable. So
Okay.
I was like interested in my bike. Like I rode my bike. I didn't even have a car till I was like 23, 24.
Right.
So I like rode my bike everywhere for a while and got interested into, I guess, more mechanical things than anything for a while.
Okay.
The electronic things kind of seemed opaque, and I was like taking like calculators apart. And I'm like, what is this? Like, why is there that black dot? Like, I didn't understand.
Mhm.
Like, oh, that's over the IC. Like, there were things that I didn't have knowledge of that I wanted to at that time. But
Right.
the mechanical things made sense, right? Like you
Yeah,
could
you can
push the gear in a specific
exactly.
direction and it'll move the chain of the bike.
And it
Um,
makes sense, yeah.
yeah, right. Like you visually see it happening.
Okay. And yeah, so you mentioned calculators as well. Is that kind of the beginning, or was that more of a you open it up and it's kind of oh what's this, and you lose interest pretty quickly and move on to go back to your bike kind of thing?
Yeah, I definitely have a, I don't know what it is, but I definitely have a habit of losing interest pretty quickly in things that I hit a wall on
Okay.
or that there's no way to see past the wall. Like I have the calculator open and now what? And there's some people who are really into calculators who would be like, "How didn't you do this?" But as far as like my interests are concerned, like I don't really hit that too often.
Okay.
Except with things I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
And then I like jumping over that wall and seeing like where it is, and that comes with, I guess, experience as well. I'm relatively young, so like it takes time to get to that point, I think,
Mhm.
and a lot of people do rush to that point, and it's like there's no need. It's like a journey. It
Yeah,
takes a
yeah.
little bit of time to figure out like, oh, here's how you reprogram the calculator. Now you can make it do this, and you can add on things externally or change the display or do something else with it.
Mhm.
But the doing something else with it's like when you're young is like I don't know what else there is to
Impossible.
do.
Yeah.
It's like a pile of parts. You're
Yeah.
you don't get it.
Yeah. There's always a path, isn't there? You know, you're not gonna pick something up and know how to do it immediately. And I can't remember. There's a figure. It's something like 1,000 hours of practice, and you become proficient at something. And as a
Yeah,
child, that can be quite frustrating, I think.
yeah. Engineering is like similar to art in so many ways. It's like it's a practice, right? Or like yoga, like meditation is like
Hmm.
these things are or medicine, like
Hmm.
which is scary to think about, but like your doctor's practicing. Like
Yeah.
there like these are unless they're like older, it's like these are things they're refining over a period of time to like and the next thing will hopefully be better than the first thing.
Yeah.
Or they'll know how to approach it differently. So it's like these are things I think about lately, but I
Okay.
didn't think about obviously like growing up taking
Bit
apart.
big and deep for a youngster.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, how did things go from there then? I was young with a bike and a couple of calculators. What?
Yeah, got my first computer probably pretty young. Um, Learned basic from there, like as the first language.
Okay.
Learned I talked about this on another podcast, but I learned like to program kind of from like learning how to cheat in video games online.
Hmm.
And there was like this software called Cheat Engine that I really liked. And you can kind of it kind of like pulled the game apart in my brain, like how things operate in the game. Like, oh, there's a health bar, and this health bar is controlled by like a variable. And
Hmm.
it's like, oh, this is controlled by an array. And I like didn't understand what these like notations and structures were, but I was like figuring out what they held, and by figuring out what they conveyed, it like the lives counter being an array, it's like, whoa, like showing each heart individually. It's
Yeah.
like you can understand the notation via um you can kind of like abstract it interestingly, and that's like things I something I think about now is like how to really abstract things so somebody's mind can grasp the concept of it, and then later they'll say, oh, that was like the life bar is an array, and then I need to implement it in a game that I'm building when I'm
Right. Right. It
older,
falls
and
into
you're like,
place and
oh, this
becomes
is great.
useful. Yeah.
Right, right. Or you're like, what is a vector? Like, what are these things like floating around? So that like captivated me. Like, with there was a goal like which to win whatever I was playing.
Right.
Not by like great means, but like it was a goal.
Yeah.
And then like there was some level of like learning about programming through it, right? Like I've always liked like that's why I like open source software is like I like seeing how things work.
Hmm.
I love transparent cases on anything mechanical. Like
Hmm.
I really like seeing the visual of what's going on, which doesn't leave a lot to the imagination. Or I like thinking of how it works, right? Like
Right.
if it's a black box, like thinking about what's in the box or how did they do it, and kind of pulling it from there.
Nice. Okay. Let's move on to high school then. How did you get on there? I think you mentioned
Wait,
a lot of
did you do anything like similar, like when you were
as a
younger?
child.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
a lot.
not to cheat, but like pulling stuff apart and getting in trouble.
Yes.
All right, it's not just me. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I did a lot of that. I think probably one of my favorite stories was as a child, I was pointing up at my dad's hi-fi up on the shelf, and I was like, I'm going to take that apart. And the instant response was, no, you're not. We're going for a walk, going out with the dog. And then a number of years later, I think I was probably in uni, his amp went pop, and it's like, I finally got to take it apart.
Was it like good? Were you
Oh,
like
I don't know.
satisfied with taking it apart, or was it a bummer? Were you like, this isn't worth it?
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah.
All right,
Anyway,
that's
back
great.
to you. Back to you. Yeah. So high school. You mentioned computer security, reverse engineering, and things. Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I got
I guess the reverse engineering kind of plays into the games and the things you were talking about just now,
yeah,
and
definitely
it's an
plays.
extension
I
of.
guess it
Yeah.
all I guess it all comes together at some point.
Yeah.
Still hasn't, but maybe it will. Um, yeah, so in high school, I guess like towards the end of it, I had a friend who knew somebody through a family friend who was like, "Oh yeah, you should talk to this professor at NYU because you're like the only person who's doing this, like who's this interested in computers, like
Hmm.
which is always nice." I'm from a suburb of New York, not from New York City, so like going to the city, like we actually have a train out there, but like train's an hour and a half, which isn't the most convenient,
Right.
and it like as a high schooler, it's like not somewhere that you think of going if you live in like that far out.
Sure. Sure. Okay.
So like I don't know if he still works with NYU, but I talked to this professor who was really interested in talking to me, which was really nice. Like he was the department chair at the time, and he was just like, "Yeah, come in, let's hang out, talk to me about anything you want." And then he said that they were doing a summer program for free, which is great,
Mhm.
involving computer security. And there was like two other students there, both from like two or three students from like the like New York City has like these prestigious high schools, as well as like their normal public schools, but they're all like built into their school program.
Right.
So like they're from these schools, and I'm like from a public school, like far not in New
Miles
York
away.
City, but they had these programs in their high schools that like
Oh,
really
jealous.
guided them in this direction. So it was interesting to
Okay.
see like different people's experiences, which like I'm not angry about, but I'm just like I was like, whoa, this exists. Like, why doesn't this exist elsewhere? It's like when you go
Mhm.
to a restaurant, you're like, this food is so good, why don't we have this at home? And it's like, oh well, there are no chefs who can cook it. Or
Yeah,
like they haven't found this and brought it back to a chef who knows what to do and
yeah.
how to market it to your local area. So yeah, and it was led by two or three really smart people
Mhm,
who are now at like Etsy and NCC and a bunch of other companies. And they kind of like went over topics that were really, really advanced for a high
mhm.
schooler. Like they
Okay,
went over like x86 reverse engineering.
right.
So like they started that with like I don't think they really knew how to work with high schoolers, but that's okay. Like they started with like, oh, let's do the Carnegie Mellon like reverse bomb binary, which is this binary file that you throw into a reverse engineering platform. So like IDA Pro,
Mhm,
and then you use like a debugger to step through each part. And through the reverse engineering platform, you learn it's almost like levels in a game, and you will go through each level of the binary and learn how to deconstruct it and how to get like this password out of it.
mhm.
And then you proceed to the next level, and it gets more complicated. And I like did it for like two or three levels, and then I was like, I'm totally out of my scope as far
Right.
as like being 17 or 18 and understanding what's going on. And the web like vulnerability stuff made more sense, I guess, because it was more maybe it's more visible visual. I'm
Yeah,
not sure. Like I always think the web stuff is interesting because like now it's not as interesting to me anymore. Like now I'm
right.
going
Okay.
the other way because I have more experience to C and more experience with C++ and more of experience with reverse engineering like applications. But like back then I was like, oh, the web stuff makes more sense. Like I understand now like the web is this giant stack and I
Mhm.
currently it's not what I work on. So
Right.
I don't have immediate like visibility into what's going on.
Okay.
But it made sense. Like you pop something open, it changed the HTML of a page,
Mhm.
or it like popped an alert over a page. And that like it made more sense than like this binary file that's obfuscated somehow and
Yeah.
it doesn't even have an exe extension on it, and you're like, what's going on?
Right.
Like once you get past the initial what's going on, you're like, why? Like you don't then like comes the practical side of why you
Okay.
like want to even get into this.
And did this team provide guidance and things? So it wasn't just like off you go then. It was sort of handheld or
Yeah,
tutorials on how to do this?
yeah.
Okay.
They did like minimal guidance, but there was guidance provided, which was nice. And then they
Okay.
were also interested in hearing like I was really interested in like RFID and like having taken like the New York City subway not that much in my life,
Mhm.
like what's on these cards and how can I get data off of it.
Right.
And they were like they're very good at like doing what my graduate advisor does where she's like stop like you scale down the scope. Like
Mhm.
you don't actually know like the scope of what you're working on right now. And they were, I guess, graduate students at the time, so they were very experienced at like knowing when to pump the brakes, but also knowing when to like push on the gas a little and be like, oh
Okay.
yeah, go explore like this thing that you're interested in for as long as you can until you
Yeah.
hit like kind of a wall.
Nice. Okay. So then from there, you went on to uni.
Yeah,
Talk to us a bit about that. What did you do?
yeah. Sorry, I'm getting over a cough.
No, no worries. Feel free to take a drink if you need one. I'll do the
Yeah,
same.
thank you. Water, cheers. Yeah, so went to school in 2014. Went to UMass Dartmouth, which is a school in Massachusetts. It's part of the UMass system. It's like a satellite campus. It's not the flagship campus.
Mhm.
I went there because I liked the EC faculty at the time.
EC
I,
being
I st- EC being electrical and computer engineering,
okay. Cool.
and I also liked how their student to teacher ratio is very low,
Right.
like 12 students per one teacher, and I was floored by it and that and the very welcoming like communal aspect, and it was like things I was looking for that helped me learn, I guess. Like
Mhm.
I don't like an enormous like fast forwarding like a few years ago, I did my grad work, started at NYU, and like we took a final exam in like a gym, and it was like what like almost entirely overwhelming. Like it
Yep.
wasn't bad, it was just overwhelming
Hmm.
and not something I wanted to experience. And having a smaller, more communal experience was good for learning. Like,
Okay. How many people on the course then, if you don't mind me asking?
uh, it's like I feel it's sometimes like how many you start with and how many you ended with.
I was
But
thinking of exactly that.
graduating was like 15 total
Okay.
people,
Yeah,
which is
nice.
small. Like not that many people at all.
Well done for making it through.
Yeah,
If it was anything like my course, we lost a lot of people along the way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, people's interests do change. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
uh, even as far as like, I don't want to do. I have a friend whose fiance is like a doctor now, and she was a mechanical engineer. She's like, I just
Okay.
didn't want to do engineering anymore. It's like, all
Yeah,
right,
fair
that's
enough.
valid.
Yeah,
It's not even that it wasn't enough of a challenge, and even if it wasn't, like people's course in life change frequently.
yeah,
Um, Definitely not an indictment on them or anything.
absolutely.
But
Agreed.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I did that for a few years. There were a few students there. One specifically, who was my friend, who was like, I was interested in doing computer security stuff. He was also doing computer security stuff, but he was
Mhm.
2 years ahead of me. So he was a good friend because like the knowledge transfer was like he was also really into Linux and Arch Linux and things that I really haven't experienced before. So
Mhm.
um, we were like, yeah, and I was telling him like, yeah, NYU has these like organizations and these other schools have these clubs, and we don't have anything here. So I mean, you can kind of see like I like taking things from elsewhere and like bringing them to areas where people are interested in because I know the interest is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and trying to do it somewhere else.
Nice.
So yeah, we started the computer security club there, and
And
lasted
was that kind of
basically
a like
until
a in your own time, just playing with stuff kind of a club, or was it like academic and related to the course?
it wasn't related to the course. It was just playing with stuff kind of as a
Yeah.
club,
Okay.
as a vested interest of like people who are into it. One of the reasons I liked UMass was like they combined the computer science department and the College of Engineering into the College of Engineering. Like the physics department also sits in the College of Engineering. Some schools sits in the
Okay.
College of Science.
Right.
So
Right.
like my friend in the physics department wasn't like he didn't feel there was a barrier to him joining a club that has nothing to do with physics. So
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
Very cool.
yeah,
Okay. And moving on then. So you went through that degree. You got the
hmm,
degree. Well done. And I think you're
thank
now
you.
doing a master's. So
Yeah,
let's talk about that a bit.
yeah. So I'm like finishing it up. I'm on like I'm saying this, so I'm holding myself accountable. I'm on page 49 of my thesis. I
Okay.
want to be done with it. At this point, I need it off my desk. I want it published, and I want to defend it.
Yep.
So started my master's a while ago, actually now in 2018. And I was going to do it part time while working for Adafruit, and I'm still doing that.
Mhm.
It takes a while, and it's like it's a lot. So it's actually less now than it was previously. So I was doing it while I was in New York. I attended NYU briefly,
Right.
and for 2 years, so like half my master's, I guess, and did that while working for Adafruit on site. So like worked in the factory on site for two
Mhm.
years, and then in 2020, pre-COVID, I guess in December, I made which was actually a good move, but I made the decision to like I wasn't happy with NYU, and I called my friend and my old advisor at UMass, who was really great to me during my undergrad. I said, like, "Do you have any slots available? I don't like." And she went to NYU, so
Mhm.
she was like kind of sympathetic, but she went in like when it didn't cost what it does, like a long
Mhm.
time
Mhm.
ago. So she opened up a spot for advising me and was like, "Yeah, sure, we'll get you in. We can get you in next month. How does that sound?"
Oh
Like,
wow.
all right,
Amazing.
yeah. Like, I was really surprised. She's like, "Yeah, Dave's finishing up his thesis, and I'm in an advising slot now, and just come over here and we'll work with you here."
That's awesome.
So I did that, yeah, in this January 2020, which was nice.
Yeah. Very good. So, you say as a thesis and things, is there a title that we're allowed to hear? Or is it still work in
Yeah,
progress?
yeah, sure. No, it's far enough, and also like that will push me to keep going. Yeah, so like the
You can
title
say
I'm
no, there's no pressure.
well, it's going to change. I don't
Okay,
have a great title right now. It's just dynamic hardware control over MQTT.
okay,
So um it's almost like a paper versus like something fun.
right.
And I'm going to change the title of it,
Sure,
but it
sure.
explains what's going on.
Okay. Well, I think we'll talk about more in a bit.
Yeah,
We'll
for
come
sure.
around to that and talk more about what it is exactly you're doing, I think. Um, but in the meantime, let's just sort of come to your now in inverted commas.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you just got a 3D printer again. You've had a bit of a hiatus from 3D printing.
A long hiatus. Um, Back in high school, I like was really into it, especially with the like open source community. Was
Mhm.
really really into it, and I don't know. I think I hit a point where I was going to college and I didn't have much space in my workshop or like in my dorm, right?
Mhm.
Like, and I didn't have any space, and like there weren't adequate 3D printer facilities offered, and also like I didn't have time. And I was also tired of calibrating things.
Right.
And so I recently got two things at once. I got on sale an espresso machine and I got a 3D printer.
Okay.
And the espresso machine requires a ton of calibration, like
Really?
from so many angles. Yeah, it's I want to say it's terrible, but the
We're
coffee's
talking
good.
about coffee, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's not in here. It's in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But we're talking coffee. So like in order to like every single bag of beans needs to be dialed into the espresso machine.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, what is that? Like almost like dialing in a 3D printer, like almost like doing the benchy calibration test. Like
Right.
the temperature is a variable, the grind size, which like I've got into brewing my own coffee in college to save money, but like the grind size is variable to the point where there is a fine tuning grind, which is like a smaller gear, and the big gear, which is internal. So like there's an external burr and an internal burr, and both of those like control this consistency of like the powder of bean that comes out.
Interesting, okay.
And then there's like, did it produce enough coffee? So like the dosing time of
Mhm.
like how long it actually runs the grinder for, because it's a mechanical process,
Right.
is a variable. And then you basically just like stick the coffee. Oh, and then there's the tamping. So when like the barista or whatever pushes
Uh-huh.
like the thing on top of the puck, and that's tamping. Of course, there are people online who have like crazy ideas about how it should
Force
be done,
gauges and
and you can like maybe it's the pressure or maybe it's the how you get the air out or how you distribute the grounds across it so the pressurized like stream of um, liquid works through the machine.
Right.
So it's like this crazy calibration process, and I started getting into it more and more and more, and I'm not there. I don't know if anybody actually gets there.
Okay.
Like so far it's only made me dislike places I get coffee from
Right.
and like places like whenever I get a good one, I'm like, whoa, I know what they put into this
Right,
to
right.
get it going to this point. But like getting all you can from a machine that costs like a couple $100s. And then like I was doing more projects with the Ruiz Bros who are Adafruit and they were shipping me cases that they 3D printed because I don't have a printer.
Okay.
And I was like doing this more and more and more. And I'm like, this reminds me of 3D printing,
Right.
like getting the consistency of like your print's perfect and then like you have something usable. And I also wanted to make more cases for electronics projects. I'm doing a lot
Mhm.
more um, things that like are IoT based and should require a case.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
so and don't have one. Like the Pico W doesn't have a case. Like there's things that I need cases for that don't exist, and this is
Mhm.
like a very small application. But I'm just like I really want to get back into like calibrating something to the point where it's good enough for me.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I've kind of got into it through making coffee, which is silly, but it gets me through the day and is like
Interesting.
something to
Okay.
think about like
Yeah.
while I'm working. It's like, all right, let's take a break from this. Let's just like
Something
Go
else
try to
completely. Yeah.
let's try to like fix this thing one more time.
Okay. So you mentioned that historically, 3D printing, you got bored of calibration and tuning it and things. Does that
Yeah.
mean that the 3D printer you have now is much better? No? Okay.
So like that's kind of an area like I don't know. I like seeing areas of improvement. Like the and then like from a mechanical perspective, like thermodynamics perspective, right? Like you can only extrude so quickly and with such temperature. It's like
Right.
you can't have a super fast 3D printer like that does FDM. Like it won't. This part of the technology won't improve.
Hmm.
But I bought. I don't have it yet. I bought an Ender 3 from Tiny Machines,
Hmm.
who's like this distributor in the US who Three's brothers recommended I buy from, and it also has a auto leveling probe. And I basically stopped being into 3D printing when the auto leveling probes came out, which is like kind of annoying. But I was into Delta printers and like the leveling required for Delta printers at
Right.
5 points for the circle. So I stopped
Okay.
being interested in it, and now I'm
When it
like,
just got painful, it's like,
yeah,
No
and
more,
I was
please."
like,
Yeah.
oh, this is really annoying, and it finally like came out, and I was like, I'm done. Like I don't have room for this. I don't have time for this.
Right. Right.
But seeing as they're now able to like, I don't know if it will work the way that I think it does, but like I see this as a tool, and
Mhm.
anything that makes tools easier to use is something I like.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
maybe the auto leveling will work, and I won't have any issues like dialing this in, or it will make dialing things in less painful,
Yeah.
right?
Fingers
Like,
crossed. Yeah. I hope it goes okay for you.
I think it will.
Nice. Cool. So you're currently sitting in your workspace, your office. I'm
Yeah,
not sure what you want to call it, but
I don't know either.
you mentioned that
It's a
you're
room in my apartment.
keen to sort of figure it out a bit as well. What's
Yeah,
going on there? Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, the winter's here. I'm in New England, specifically Providence, Rhode Island. So I'm like, it gets cold here.
Hmm.
It gets very cold, and I'm at the point where like I need to make it more of somewhere I would like to be versus like somewhere that's utilitarian. The
Hmm.
last apartment I had was really small. This one's much bigger, and it was forced to be utilitarian.
Right.
Like I didn't have room on the wall for something nice. I had to put something on the wall.
Okay.
So I'm currently in the process of making it like kind of cozy,
Okay.
like making it a little bit less sterile feeling because like I
Anything
feel
in
there's two
particular
ways.
that you're
Yeah,
thinking of for that?
yeah. I have a new shelving unit that I'm gonna put back there, but it's a wire rack from Home Depot.
Right.
So it's like totally industrial looking, kind of like the rack I have over here.
Hmm.
But I need a wire mesh shelf. But like what I put on that rack is going to be different. Like previously, like I have another one of these shelves over there. I use these big project bins from
Okay.
Food Food, and they're all lined up with like another one. They're all like super organized, and I have them
Nicely
on
labeled.
shelves.
Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's well, I have too many of them not to label at this point. Um, and then I also do like smaller storage boxes for everything
Hmm.
else. So like, sweet, Devin, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, we just got a message from Devon.
1
I
hour
hope
from the
it
box to print is what I'm looking for. So this is good.
sounds good. Yeah, yeah. Nice.
Yeah, so I'm like looking for things to put on my on these like industrial shelving units that aren't so sterile, right? Like
Uh-huh.
there are definitely two types of people who build electronics workshops. There's the people who have like a really pretty workshop
Hmm.
and the people who love having it and calling it a lab.
Right.
And it's great to do both. Like I would love to do both, but I also like um I don't know.
You
I
want to
need
feel
somewhere I
comfy
enjoy
and
being. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So like
Especially if
I'm
you're
going to
working there
put
as
books
well,
on
and
it that
yeah.
aren't just engineering. Like previously it's like references for me and
Hmm.
my tools and my stuff. And this room is like very much purpose driven. And
Hmm.
it's like a little bit too much. So I'm working on like kind of chipping that away.
Yeah. Okay.
And then putting things on the wall, like as far as artwork would be nice.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome.
Um,
Very good.
yeah. So I'm just
Cool.
playing with it. I don't know if you have any plans. And then lighting, like I have one window that's right here. You
Right.
can kind of see it reflecting in my face. and that's it. So, like I have a big standing lamp that's over here that actually shoots light up onto the ceiling because there's
Mhm.
no ceiling light, and that kind of like blankets the room in light.
Lighting
But
is
I
so
want more
important, isn't it?
lights.
It can make or break a room.
Yeah, and I need to get this to the point where I have multiple lights for I don't know, it should just be a little bit less harsh to be
Right.
in here. Like, it's great
Okay.
that's purpose driven, right? Like,
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, yeah, don't work on your couch." It's like, "Okay, I won't work on my couch." And then this is the total opposite where it's like, "I only go into this room for work." It's very work driven.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Oh,
so yeah,
never
that's
mind.
my plan.
Okay, cool. Let's have a chat about some of your projects then, and some of
Mhm.
the things you've been playing with. Should we start out with the Gmail box?
Yeah, sure, I did this a while
Um,
ago.
so this is, if you just scroll to the top and give us a quick overview, there's a nice little, there you go, animation. So just run us through very quickly what this is and what the plan is.
Yeah, sure, this is a physical mailbox, it's
Okay.
like a 3D print, and there's a servo in the side that's, like, right over here.
Hmm.
And whenever you get a new email, it just like raises a flag up,
Okay.
and then after a duration of time, the flag goes down, and that's
Okay.
it. That's all it does.
So it's not so
You
much
know,
you have unread mail. It's more that there was one recently. Is that right?
there was a new mail, so like if
Yeah.
your like mail carrier puts a mail on your like, it's like a physical representation of a virtual
Yeah.
item.
Okay. Nice. Very good. And so this was developed on ESP8266, was it? And
Yeah, a while
then
ago.
obviously there's that big banner at the top there. Let's talk about
Yeah,
that quickly. So I'm not sure if people can read
yeah.
that, but it says Google implemented changes to the API ecosystem that impacted the Gmail applet on both IFTTT and Zapier. This guide is no
Hmm.
longer possible as a result of these changes and should not be followed. So let's talk about that, because that's a really interesting thing that there are a few different things like this that can come up and affect people and maybe even professionals, companies doing things like this.
Yeah, it affects people from so many angles. Like,
Mm,
first off, it sucks. Like, it sucks that this project can never be used again, like without serious modification.
right.
And like the modification will come in the form of me or somebody who wants to build this, basically interacting with the Gmail API
Directly. Yeah.
directly, right? Like they have a API client or they're sending HTTP requests directly to the REST API. And like the real question is like who is to blame? So
Hmm.
like Google implemented the change. IFTTT and Zapier both had their Gmail integration between Adafruit.io and Gmail. So like this integration sat in the middle and passed messages between both. That integration broke.
Right.
So like, is it on IFTTT to like fix this? Is it on Zapier to fix this? Are they're not fixing it? Is Google responsible? Maybe they shouldn't change their API. Like, so it becomes this problem that's like it's not even the physical hardware works, right? Like I
Right.
could do something else and this will always work. I could just tell the servo to be written to a different position and it'll work.
Hmm.
IFTTT still works. Zapier still works. Gmail still works. What doesn't is like all of them combined to make a project.
Yeah.
So I started seeing this like this is probably the first guide I started seeing it on. And then sometime over the past year, Google put I did this project for Adafruit. I did a bunch of these IoT plant monitors.
Hmm.
Um, and I did them for Adafruit.io, Google Cloud IoT Core, AWS IoT, and Azure. Because we wanted specifically like Lady Ada wanted a client for each of these popular IoT platforms and services for CircuitPython. So I was
Hmm.
like writing these CircuitPython drivers, and we got a lot of interesting things in CircuitPython from that I could talk about. But like I saw in Hacker News like this year that Google discontinued support for IoT Core on August 16th, 2023.
Hmm.
So this is a direct integration with Google. So like you can point finger easily towards Google, but
No
like
one in the middle. Yeah.
these are like small projects, right? Like these are just things that I did for work and people probably built them. But these are
Well,
projects that are meant to be
speaking of
left
people who
alone.
probably built one, Axmax made one of your Gmail boxes.
Oh, sweet. Yeah,
Yeah.
Nelly Pedro did the initial design of it, and I
Okay.
did the code, and it was a long time ago.
But yeah, as you say, this is potentially really affecting, especially I think hobbyists and people who are getting into this space.
It
Possibly
hits.
worse. It's more painful for them, maybe, or
Yeah,
more
it's definitely
discouraging at least.
it's painful for hobbyists because they'll go to this guide that they want to build, like the Gmail box, right? Like, and they'll see like, oh, it's no longer possible to build what I wanted to,
Or they
and
might
like a big,
miss the notification, go ahead anyway, and find out sort of too late or whatever.
which is also like I put it on every single page for when I write guides, for Adafruit, but like the problem is like Gmail, everybody uses, well, most people use Gmail. Like
Yep.
they have a Gmail account either through work or some people use Outlook. But like generally you have Outlook or Gmail, and that's 2023. You can host your own thing, sure, but like you have your own domain, sure. But
Yep.
like I use Gmail, most people do. So it's like you want to use these services that everybody uses in projects for the visibility of the project, right? Like
Yep. Yep.
if you're promoting a calendar, I don't think to use the Microsoft or Google calendar equivalent, or Microsoft or Apple Calendar. I don't use iCal. I'll use Gmail in a project.
Mhm.
So because that will get the widest net of people who want to build it because they use the same thing as me,
Works for
and
them.
then
Yeah.
like who want to work with it. So when these things get discontinued, it's a bummer from my perspective as the person who's made the project for someone to build.
Mhm.
From the perspective of someone who wants to build this project, and then like let's scale it higher, right? Like let's say I had made this a Kickstarter project and I shipped it. Like this wasn't made for free that anybody could download the files and build. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
this was a Kickstarter project.
As
I
a
shipped it.
product now. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a product, not a project. So and it costs $20. And now you have a thing that's $20 on your desk. And if it's not on open source project, and now you don't have the firmware for it, right? Like
Mhm.
now you really can't do anything with it. And like sure, maybe a community like Rebel or the Pebble open source equivalent will start up, and your smartwatch from this Kickstarter campaign will suddenly start working again. And it's like amazing. Like that's cool to me.
Mhm.
And that's a great alternative. But most of these projects, like these IoT projects, like if something along the chain dies, like the hardware is fine, which is frustrating to a user. So it's
And
frustrating to like a developer, a customer, and then like someone who's just using it. Like you have this physical, like software dying, like dark sky. This is my personal like 2022 sadness was dark sky got bought by Apple. I loved using dark sky on my phone, which is this
okay.
weather service. It
Right.
was like super good. It would tell me I recently got a puppy and I have to walk her, and like it would tell me what probability it is for rain like at every single second, and I love that. Like
Yeah.
that was perfect for having a dog, or like perfect for like I'm gonna take a run um to the store or something. But they discontinued dark sky. Apple bought dark sky from them, and then
Killed it
Apple
off.
took it and they integrated it into WeatherKit.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And they're like, this is new WeatherKit powered by dark sky, and it's not as good.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really not. Like I've deleted dark sky on my phone. I'm like, I can't depend on this. It's going to die. But there's a difference between deleting something on my phone and having a physical thing sitting on my
Yeah.
desk, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's the
And
like
there are few ways in which this can affect people. So, we've covered API changes, meaning that a project that you've put together is no longer functional.
hmm
Google IoT Core is being discontinued, so there are services that just completely go away.
that's
But there's also
huge,
things like pricing models which change, and all of a sudden maybe something was free and now you've got to pay, and it's like
right?
I don't want to, I can't justify that, or whatever it might be. Means that this now then falls apart. It's super frustrating for people who've been using and playing with these things to learn, and then it's almost wasted effort, wasted materials, all this kind of thing.
Yeah, like the best example is like I always think of like the Peloton bikes. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
they're so expensive.
Yep.
Or I mean, they're lowering prices, but at one point they were really expensive, and the treadmill was in the thousands of dollars.
Wow. Okay.
And you need a service to use it. Like you purchase something for multiple thousands of dollars, and now you need a service. Like, okay, I have the funds to purchase this. I have the funds to purchase a service that's X amount of money a month.
Yeah.
Like it's frustrating, but like that's their business model, sure. Um, but what happens when they go away? Like,
Yeah.
you have this firmware that's like designed for Peloton. Like, maybe someone will make some type of open source, but you have this advanced piece of hardware
Yeah,
that's sitting
absolutely.
in thousands of people's
And
houses.
it's potentially quite dangerous if it goes wrong or whatever. So even open source projects may not be something that you're willing to use from that point of view.
Right? It's
Um,
like,
yeah, scary, isn't
yeah, and
it?
there's no good alternative. The alternative for like the home automation stuff is good so far. Like, um, I've seen like it might have been LG or Samsung, but one of the major appliance brands like had to shut down something recently, and all the sensors are like at immediately end of life, like regardless of
Hmm.
what the
Yeah,
manufacturer said, they're end of life. And I have a feeling this is going to happen for devices that like they can't get chips for.
yeah,
They'll
yeah,
just stop manufacturing them and EOL like all these devices that connect to these services. And because the device is EOL and like connected to a service, the service is also going to be deprecated,
yeah.
right? Like, so it becomes a huge, so like I kind of see this like starting to like snowball a little bit harder than it had before. And it's not even just like I'm worried about this, and then like the Matter protocol is coming out, so like there's some things that are um starting to happen. Like the home assistant model is good. Like,
Mhm.
you run this instance of this home automation software, and it's not Alexa, and it's not HomeKit, and it's
Right.
not Google's Nest software in your house, and you physically have a thing that you could see, this is my server. Um, but the configuration and onboarding onto it is like it's not
And the
there. Like, you're
maintenance as
running a
well. You know,
Docker
now
instance.
it's you that's keeping this up and running. It's not someone
Now
else who's
you're a
doing it for
system
you.
administrator.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
which some people want to do, like, and that's really cool. I've like seen I'm on the Home Lab, which is like a home networking stack, like a server lab subreddit, and there are people who are like, yeah, I learned how to do this and I springboarded this into a job, and now I'm a systems administrator, which
Mhm.
is really awesome. But like some people, the majority of people don't want to become a systems administrator.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
like once this starts happening, like, and their fridge doesn't connect, like,
Yeah, yeah,
which I used to be like, "Ha, that's not happening. Samsung isn't gonna do that." But now it's like,
yeah.
I don't know, it's possible.
Yeah.
So,
There you go.
now that I start seeing this, like, there's an alternative, but the usability isn't there. The reliability is there, but the usability isn't there. So it's like, I'm curious to see what's going to come upstream from the open source projects, and then maybe like Matter has a lot of promise. Like, that's a
Mhm.
standardized protocol for IoT devices. Like,
Right, right.
if we standardize the protocol that they all speak the same language, maybe we can get a
Transfer between
version of Home
platforms or
Assistant, right? Like, maybe we can have some, what it's now, they have the protocol, but they don't have like the platform itself,
Mhm.
because everybody wants a different platform. And there's like, from a vendor perspective, like, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
fascinating that, this is a massive problem that spans all of technology almost, archival of old, well, not even old, but, modern games, computer games and things is
Yeah.
a real serious problem. You can't play them anymore once the service gets turned off.
Yeah. I think
Um,
Rock Band is like
yeah.
the latest one to do that.
Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fascinating conversation, and yeah,
Yeah.
there's a big deep hole to look into that one.
Huge. Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about Laura quickly. I think you've
Sure.
done quite a bit of stuff with Laura.
I have.
Um, just outline very quickly what it is for those who maybe don't know, and then we'll have a chat about it as well.
Yeah. So like, LoRa is a radio protocol, right? Like, so Wi-Fi is a radio-based RF protocol. LoRa is too. LoRa is a modulation. LoRaWAN, which sits on top of LoRa, is a modulation of the MAC layer. So
Mhm.
what that means is, you have different, like, when you're doing an IoT project, right? Like, you have different transports
Right.
to send data. Like, you can send it over Wi-Fi, you can
Mhm.
send it over Bluetooth, you can send it over Ethernet, and you can also send it over LoRa. And
Okay.
each of those has a different trade-off from a different level. So for LoRa, you're sacrificing one thing. You're sacrificing the data you're allowed to send. It's a small payload, but it can be sent very, very, very far. Like, super, super far. I forgot the distance, but like the person sent it from a mountaintop in South America all
Many
the way down the
kilometers.
mountaintop again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like they had line of sight, but like this is still really far.
I
And
think
for
one of the
I
super impressive little tidbits about LoRa is that you can receive a signal that's below the noise floor. And the only really ubiquitous thing that I was aware of before that was GPS, where you can actually pull the signal out of, below the noise floor, which is crazy when you think about it.
yeah, and then like this has been popular for IoT for like two reasons. One, it's like cheap,
Mhm.
like these radios that generate, like there are chipsets that will do it, but Wi-Fi chipsets will do it too. Like the ESP32 can be configured to send LoRa messages. There's projects for that, but there are modules made by like Hope RF and Murata, who are like more known manufacturers for this type of thing.
Yep.
So these projects got super popular for low power, long range IoT projects. But the one thing it doesn't have is like the uplink. Like, so you can send these things between packet radios, and it's useful, but it's like those like weather stations you can buy at like in the US like Walmart,
Hmm.
but that costs like $30 and that you can put it outside your house and you have a nice little screen inside and you're like, oh, this talks to the screen, but I can't do anything. Like the data's it's not in the screen, but it kind of is. It's like I can't move the data somewhere useful. I can't
Yep.
plot a chart. Like anything I want to do with this like environmental data, I can't do.
Yep. Just gets lost. Yeah.
So like enter LoRaWAN and what they were trying to do with
Let me
like the Things
share your
Network.
screen. Yeah.
Yeah, so Adafruit, we might still sell it. I don't know if we do. We were selling this router. I don't know if we do anymore.
Okay.
Called the Things Network router,
Hmm.
and I'll give it a shout out to the guys in New York City. There's a Things Network in New York City, and if you're in New York, you should go to their workshops, and they have a great network of these routers which support coverage over all five boroughs of the city,
Oh,
which is a
nice.
huge area, right? Like
Hmm.
huge area. One of the like main projects that's come out of that is they have this, forgetting the name of it, but it's like HeatSeek or HeatSeek Labs,
Hmm.
and they have these sensors. They have these sensors that like sit inside of your house, and they're LoRa based, and they, I mean, I'll say what it is. So like they have an enclosed humidity, indoor temperature, like ambient monitoring system. So like this is probably a DHT22
Right.
connected to a black box, and it's monitoring the acceptable temperature. So like because it monitors acceptable temperature and connects it to the web, it shows the legal minimum. So this is the minimum the landlord in New York City is responsible for. The temperature in your apartment, which is colder than the
Okay.
so it will find the violations and how long the violations are of each landlord. In this is like started in New York City housing projects,
Hmm.
and because it uses LoRaWAN, it can transmit between all the floors
Yeah.
of these like housing structures that are enormous and start to record violations. So like this is a really cool practical approach to temperature monitoring that actually has an application outside of it's useful, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
this is like, and I'm starting to see more projects like this. So like with what we were trying to do or like working with a few years ago is like how do we get LoRa and LoRaWAN data to Adafruit.io for
Hmm.
plotting? So like the Things Network exists kind of as a platform, but like it's more of a connector service. I like mentioned that earlier. That's like IFTTT. So like I have all my data in the centralized service. Like what next? Like,
Hmm.
and the options were to like do a Grafana dashboard, which like is difficult for like a new beginner to these platforms. And like, oh well, we have like a Docker thing that you can, but it's like I don't I don't want the Docker thing. Or you can use like an easier service like AWS or Adafruit.io and send data to it. So that's
Nice.
what we were working on for a little bit and just trying to play with
Okay.
and successfully playing with ideas of like sending data and using Circuit Python because the library they were using was like not amazing, and it was Arduino based, and Circuit Python was like kind of taking off at that point. We were like, how do we get this working? And I have to go back at some point and redo this.
Yeah.
It's like, how did we get this working with Circuit Python?
Nice. Very cool. You mentioned Adafruit IO a couple of times, or Adafruit. Apologies if I keep pronouncing it wrong. Let's talk a bit more about this. This loops back to your masters,
Yeah,
and Whippersnapper. Do you want
yeah,
to talk to us about that quickly?
yeah, sure.
Maybe share your
So
screen as well if you're ready.
yeah, sure. So like over the past 2 years, like when we're lady like pitched me like a next iteration of Adafruit IO, which was we had this platform where we can log data. So like I mean this is kind of like a lot, but like you can log data and you can have dashboards and your data can go on feeds, which are historical representations of like containers of data from your devices, and then you can plot that onto a dashboard.
Hmm.
But kept like going over each of these guides, like each of these like planters for like for instance, like the PyPortal one for CircuitPython. CircuitPython's barrier to entry is super low,
Hmm.
so it's like it's still difficult. And where the difficulty wasn't in the code. Like the difficulty was actually getting it connected to the service.
Right.
So like Azure was like probably actually the best of all of them in my personal opinion. Uh, not really to work. And then we did one for Google Cloud, and then we did one for AWS, and then there was a project years and years and years ago by this fellow, and he did this project called Fermata, and Fermata was a really early Arduino project, and generally the gist of it, without like going too in depth, is that you could send commands to a microcontroller over USB. So like if your board is like connected to the computer, your computer can tell the board what to do.
Hmm.
And it like the paper is titled like Fermata, like making microcontrollers act as an extension of your computer. So like the idea was to extend USB outwards to a microcontroller without programming.
Hmm.
So it was a really cool project and still is. Like it still runs on most microcontrollers, but a few of the decisions they made are not transferable to the current year, and they're
Right.
also not amazing for like the internet. So for example, like one of them is like every Fermata command is actually they use a modified subset of MIDI, and because of that, they're limited to the amount of commands they can actually have and the amount
Okay.
of pins they can actually address, because they
Interesting.
picked this protocol, which was like it's what they were the author was familiar with at the time. But this is like someone who was he like wrote this for NYU's ITP program, but like this is like a design decision that wouldn't allow extensibility. Like if we just ported Fermata to work in Adafruit IO instead of building a new thing,
Right.
it would work, but it's not extensible enough. And
Okay.
defining new services, if you have a limitation in your protocol, like you're limited to the amount of things you can do.
You've already got a ceiling over your head, haven't you? Yeah. It's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, so this was built to kind of not have a ceiling, which
Okay.
is really
Awesome.
fun. It's a fun challenge, and it's been a nice challenge for like the last basically 2.5 years. So like
Okay.
last year, a lot of my year was focused on adding features and like kind of building this up.
Mhm.
And the first year was like, can we do this? And we can. Like, so the goal is to make a system that like sits on the website and it's all interactive through the website. So like a lot of things at Adafruit were also going on at the time, like the stemma connectors that you can do quick disconnect. You don't have to solder anymore. You don't have to solder the breakouts
Mhm.
together, which is really nice for IoT projects because you can just chain environmental sensors to a NeoPixel or to an actuator, and then like you don't it starts to lower the hardware curve, and then like you have these IoT projects that people create that you would need experience with building something embedded, right? Like, which means that you need hardware and software experience.
Mhm.
You need to know how to send that data to the internet, so you need some type of networking experience. Um, you need to make it small enough to send to the internet too.
Right.
So like there's your programming experience in there. Then you also need to know front end, back end web design, like development. So like you need to know how to store this data. That's your back end. You also need to know how to route that data. So you could use a router like MQTT. And then you need the front end web design. So like how do I display the data?
Yeah.
So like building these projects is like incredibly complicated. It's like the robotics projects. I always feel that with robotics because I'm not a robotist, but like I always see these projects. It's like you need to know kinematics and industrial design and mechanical engineering. And
Yeah.
it's like these projects are so hard to build, but people want to build them.
Sure.
And a lot of people who want to build them they're technically inclined, but they don't all have the programming background. Like they don't like we can make it easier from Circuit Python, but like can only make it so easy to the point where you still have to program, and then the connection to the internet is tough.
Right.
So this is a managed solution, which doesn't like it exists some places, but it really hasn't existed in this like iteration, and it will change. Like this is in beta.
Okay. Is
So
this
this is a
accessible
way,
to people today? Like people can use this?
yeah, they
Yeah.
can go to Adafruit and just type in Whippersnapper.
Okay.
So to clarify, like Whippersnapper is a firmware. So
Right.
it's an Arduino library. It runs on your board. So it runs on like the Pico W. It runs on
Mhm.
like the ESP32, the ESP8266, 832, the 66, the ESP32S2. So
You got a good
like Circuit
collection of parts
Python,
right
like
there.
it's my desk.
It's your job.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
So
what
this
my
this
desk is
this runs
doing.
on these embedded microcontrollers and connects to the internet, identifies and says I'm number 3 or whatever.
So not
Um,
only that, it says like, "Hi, I am Brent. I am connecting to Adafruit IO
right.
with this Wi-Fi network with my Adafruit IO credentials." So you have your Wi-Fi connection step, which is hard,
Yeah.
your credential step, which is also really hard, and then it also says, "I'm a Raspberry Pi Pico W," and then the service says, "Okay, you're a Pico W," and we have an open source, um, almost like Microsoft likes using the word digital twin. So we have a representation of what this board looks like in Adafruit IO, like
Okay.
in the back end. So Adafruit IO will only present its capabilities based on what the board actually has.
Very nice.
So, and it will give you the full pin map as well.
Awesome.
Um, so
So
it
we
like,
can we can see on your screen
yeah,
that there's a PKW there. Um,
right. And that's the
you
one
okay
that's
to
on
just
my
kind of
desk.
walk us through what we can do with this?
Yeah. So that's this board.
Okay.
So, I can show development stuff as well. So we have like multiple components. So these are like pin based. So these are all logical inputs, outputs. So like an input would be a push button. But
Okay.
instead of a lot of services like started noticing like with usability, like this really abstracts everything.
Mm,
So instead of saying you have a digital input, right? Like a lot of people don't know what that is. Like the person using this will not make that connection. Or they might, but you have to teach them that that's the connection.
right.
But they have a physical push button on their desk, or they know their board has an LED on it, which is something I'm working on figuring out how to display better. Or they like, so we had the Ruiz brothers like go in and model all these things and what they do. So like the buzzer is shaking and like the reed
Okay.
switch is opening, and it's like
Uh-huh.
what these things are actually doing. Like gives the person a better idea of what they want to do with it in the future. And then this I'll figure out how to display better, but we have a lot of I2C components now. So these are mostly sensors
Okay.
that are
And
environmental sensors.
how does it work if we were to want to add maybe a button and a sensor to
Sure. So
that
like
that Pico?
if you wanted an LED,
Hmm.
you'd click the LED. It knows every single pin of the Raspberry Pi Pico W,
Okay. Yeah.
but I know there's one built in. And you click create component, and you can like uh, you could like turn it on, which like it's super faint, and then you can like turn it off.
Oh, look
And
at
that data
that.
is logged
Okay.
as well, and then you can download the data JSON as CSV. So like we
Nice.
have this huge Adafruit IO like platform, and it's like what else can we do with it? And like
Mhm.
this is the main thing. Um,
That's
and
very
then
cool.
I also have a HT20 temperature sensor. So like one of the things for this year is like we're going to redo this list, and
Sure.
we're going to have like filtering. And each of these devices has a, so what's like further nerdy about this is each of these forms is built through a JSON file.
Yep.
So there's a JSON file that says there's an HT20. Oh, I can look at it. So there's an HT20. Here's the I2C address that Adafruit.io looks for. We have ambient temperature, Fahrenheit temperature, and humidity.
Mm-hmm.
And Adafruit.io, and that's all someone needs to submit to get their sensor definition in.
Awesome.
And then Adafruit.io will take it, pull it into this picker, and then it will present those options. So you can say like, we'll do Celsius, and you can tell it to like report data back every interval.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can click create component, and that's the live data.
Look at that.
Which is really
That's
fast.
awesome.
Like,
yeah.
And like 30 seconds. So like the next 30 seconds will come in and then we'll have a graph. Maybe it will go up. Like if I put my thumb on it, it'll go up in 30 seconds. So like this is currently my project of how, and you can like once you start plugging and playing with these I2C components, like people generally want to make sure they're still active. So like you can do an I2C scan. So like while this is connected to my computer, like this is actually over the air. This is all through Wi-Fi. This is like network, like the stack. Like this is a payload that's in this format called protocol buffers over MQTT over Wi-Fi.
Right. So you could theoretically pick that PKW up, take it anywhere with Wi-Fi, plop it down, and off it goes again.
Yeah.
That's
and
cool.
you can reconfigure it. If you're like, I don't want this HT20, you can just like delete it.
Right.
And then you can like, I don't have as many sensors on my desk as I usually do. I'm cleaning. You can grab another sensor off your desk if you didn't clean it up. And you can like log the data again. So it's like,
very cool.
Yeah, this is something I'm playing with, adding NeoPixel support, adding sleep modes, which is going to be huge. Adding display support, which will be nice too. So like, you can send data to a device's display. You can also display what data, like, this is kind of opaque as far as like I'm concerned, like what's going on here. It's like, what is this? So one of the things I'm thinking of is like, oh, well, we'll have a display that like in the early 2000s, like a lot of these IoT projects use the term like information radiator, like it radiates information out. So like the display will show the information that's like being pulled out and being pushed into the device. So it's not too like abstract. And some people want to see that. Like, I think a lot of people do.
That's awesome.
But what's cool is like this is completely open source. So like the firmware that runs on this device is open source.
Right.
The forms that get generated by Adafruit.io are open source. And then the board definitions are also open source. So it's like, this is a real big open source project that I'm excited to like keep working on.
That's really, really cool. So just out of curiosity then, if you were to add a sensor, is that something that the firmware needs support for, or is that something that's pushed entirely from the cloud
we don't
down?
support OTA just yet. It's probably something I want to get to. The issue of supporting OTA is that it can brick devices. And a while ago in the Adafruit forums, like I keep coming back to this example, but it's like we had a user who had a temperature sensor on a volcano in Australia running some Adafruit.io code. And we updated the SSL certificate on Adafruit.io. And he said, what happened? And like we sent out like information in advance, but like I guess the connection wasn't there, or he didn't get the message or something. And I was like, well, like you need to physically take your device and flash it again, and that will update the SSL certificate.
Right.
So, but he's like, it's on a volcano. I'll be there in 2 weeks. It's like that isn't tenable. But like, what if we did OTA and we flashed it and it was sitting on a volcano and now he can't access it?
It's completely
so
gone.
Like,
which
is worse? So like when we do implement OTA, when we will, is just like I'm slow on doing this, is like I want to see a way to do it where the
Super
user's
robust.
presented with the worst case scenario and they're acknowledging it
Yeah.
could happen. Which isn't like, oh, I'm like saving my ass. It's like, no, like you need to be informed of what this functionality could possibly do in your project.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
and then also like the newer OTA methods, some of them store the previous firmware during the process and can
Mhm.
revert.
Yep.
So I want to see if there's any like Circuit Python, maybe like one of these like bigger open source microcontroller projects like and Zephyr, like what headways um, occurring over there, and can we pull that into here?
Awesome.
So no, like to answer your question, if you wanted to add your own sensor, like you had the ADDIE 123, like the ADDIE 123 would be added on the component side. So like you'd make this JSON file that says the ADDIE 123 only does like temperature,
Right.
and here's its I2C address. And then I would pull it into IO, but then you would need to submit a pull request to the firmware to add it.
Got you.
And
Yeah.
that's in C++.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I had heard from Devin earlier saying real world application tracked hurricanes in Florida that hit me directly with pressure, temperature, and humidity. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. So I think that sounds fantastic. And
Yeah, thanks.
as we mentioned earlier, that's a big part of your master's project. So all the
Yeah.
best. I hope that goes well.
Yeah, thank you.
It's looking pretty shiny at the moment, so well done. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool because it's like the master's thesis intersects with the project. And then I also have like user story, like Devin, like I have user stories
Yeah.
coming out of this. So a lot of like master's thesis, a lot of times when people do software projects that have impact, they'll do a survey or they'll do a workshop.
Right.
Like Microsoft published something on their JackDAC protocol, and they did a hackathon in order to evaluate the success
Okay.
of this and how easy it is for makers.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of nice because I don't have the funds that Microsoft has of writing my thesis. Like, I'm Brent, like I'm not Microsoft, so it would be cool, but like I don't have that. So it's nice to be able to see like people using these devices, and a lot of people are, um, in the field and getting stories back from them, because it's almost like here's it's usable. People are using it. I'm not forcing feedback either. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what I'm getting so far is positive. So I'm happy about it.
Awesome. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Well, I think that brings us to about time. Are you happy to stop there?
Hmm.
Is there anything you'd like to say just before we say goodbye? No?
No, I'm
Okay.
pretty talked out. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me. It's been fascinating to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
for hanging out.
no problem. I'm pretty sure we'll have a show next week, but I'm still trying to figure out the guest. So keep an eye out. I'll make announcements. Otherwise, it's been Brent and Atty, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye all.